Hi everyone.
Hey.
Welcome to the third edition of our rapid fire Q&A on web analytics. My name is Avinash.
And I'm Nick Mihailovski.
And we're going to go through a bunch of questions. We're going to try a new format today. We've got a bunch of technical questions. We're going to ram through that initially. And then we've got some other wonderful questions, and we'll go through those. I did want to say that we want to use this video forum as a way to answer your analytical questions and challenges with analysis and the kinds of websites and metrics you should choose and things like that. So we want to make, Nick and I want this to be a much more broader forum for all your analytics questions, not just about Google Analytics. So please share your questions. The other thing is, video is a terrible way to answer tech support questions that are specific to a website. We can only hazard a guess and such. We've got some wonderful ways in which you can get help on Google Analytics, and on the top of this particular blog post for the video, we're going to list 4 or 5 different specific ways in which you can get help directly from Google or otherwise. So please check those out in case we skip a deeply technical question you might have. So with that, let's jump to questions. So Nick, we're going to have you go through a rapid fire series of questions. Here's the first one from Soren Sporchio, from Denmark. And his question is there a way to group referrals? For example, visitors from Hotmail looking like, blah, blah, blah referral, and blah, blah, blah referral, and blah, blah, blah referral. Would it be nice to group them? Essentially, each referral that Soren's got is something, something, something.mail.live.com, then something other, something other, something other.mail.live.com. And I think that's a good question about wanting to group them all together. How would you do that, Nick?
That's a great question. So when analytics, when you send data to analytics, we process all the data, and then we create the reports that you see today. And what you're trying to do is actually use the reports to create filters to group referrals. In this case, there's a little known but very powerful feature called profile filters. And what that allows you to do is, once you collect the data, before we process it, you're allowed to say, truncate any of the values that Google Analytics collects. For example, because everything had mail.live.com, you could say only include those parts and rewrite that field to say, instead of all the other stuff, just mail.live.com. So that way when we process the data, everything looks like one entry. So that way when you're looking at the reports, everything's already grouped. So again, we'll link to it. Profile filters is the solution. Okay,
so essentially what you're saying is we'll strip away snt.mail.live.com. We just throw away sn.snt based on the filtering you're saying. How about using segmentation, Nick? I could just as easily create a segment for this traffic and do something, use a regex to group all this into one bucket, can I?
You absolutely can, right? And that's another good way to do it. Advanced segments allow you to, instead of using these profile filters, do something on the fly like that. Cool. The thing is then you have to apply the segment all the time, so it becomes a little bit tedious. If you spend a little bit of time up front, you probably get a lot better in a long time.
Excellent, excellent. Sean from Bristol has our next question, Nick. And he has a suite of 25 websites and uses Google Analytics. What he wants to be able to do is to see all of these 25 websites as one group, as a whole, and see the details of organic traffic and do basically SEO analysis. But rather than tracking 25 individual pieces, he wants to put it all together in one bucket. Can we do that?
So it depends on how your site is. Generally, you can do that. What we do is we track every Google Analytics account by a unique ID. And so right now you have 25 sites, you probably have 25 IDs. And so the recommended approach for this is to create a new ID and use that common ID across all your sites. That way, in one profile, you can view all the data. Now, you have to also keep in mind that the way Google Analytics tracks individual users is by using cookies, first-party cookies that are tied to the domain. So if these sites live on separate domains, and somebody goes from site A to site B, they'll look as two different people, because the individual visitor that we're tracking will not persist across the different domains.
Oh, absolutely. No, I think that's fair. And in this case, for Nick's experience, I think that will be fine. But essentially what you're saying is I can have 2 different analytics code, Google Analytics code on the same page. The first one would track the site individually, just as a part of, let's say, avinash.kaushik.net. That would be one. And then I could get another, the second code would be to track a group of websites. So nick.kaushik.net, brett.kaushik.net, let's say we have these things.
Right.
That second code will track it all as a group. And for that second code, the one that is copy-pasted the same across all 25 websites, as I go from one site to the other, would that keep track of me as one unique visitor?
So again, it depends on how the site is structured. If it's a bunch of subdomains, you can set so the cookie is being able to be read. The individual visitor ID is in a cookie that can be read across the subdomains. If they're very separate domains like a.com and b.com, then you can't do that. It's a lot harder to do that.
Okay, so the best thing, Sean, I think actually for all cross-domain tracking, I think, is that work with the GAC and make sure they'll ask you all the specific questions that you need to answer in order to make the right trade-off and get it done right. So it is definitely possible. We'll link to an article.
Yeah, absolutely.
But also consult the GAC, you were saying?
So just to define, the GAC is our authorized consultants, and they have a lot of expertise in the product and can help you set it up properly.
Great. Here's the next one from Shailendra in India. And he says, I have 3 different versions of the website, English, Chinese, and French. Can I track which version of them is performing well using GA? That's a good one.
That's a good one. It really depends on how you define performing well. If you need a very high-level overview, we just released this new feature called custom variables. And so when somebody selects a different language, you can define that visitor as having used a certain language. That's one option. The other option, again, is to do what we just described, which is use multiple tracking codes on the page. For each of the different language sites, you would have one ID, and then for all of them, you would use the same ID. And that way you can get a richer set of reporting. For example, which referrals came into the language compared to the English language versus which referrals came to the French language.
Yeah, exactly. And it would really also depend if it's site.com/English/Chinese or English.site.com or EnglishSite.com or ChineseSite.com. I mean, we really don't have all those details here in this question, but some of those things will influence how we end up tracking it. Of course, it can totally be tracked, but you see the challenges in understanding these nuances, because these nuances will determine if you're doing the right tracking or not. Okay, here's the next question. What about YouTube, Nick? Well, actually, you worked on this, I think.
We did, yeah.
And it's from Seth in Lincoln, Nebraska. Hi, Seth.
Hey.
I've added the GA account ID to my YouTube branded channel. As near as I can tell, the only data I'm receiving is on page view stats. What other values do I receive from YouTube tracking through Google Analytics? Hey, I want to do this for my brand channel.
That's right, yeah. You should definitely set it up. So this just follows along with the other questions that we had. One of the challenges with YouTube is that we have a massive site where internally at Google we track it with Google Analytics. But then we have subsections of the site that are owned by partners. And those subsections we want to track independently from each other. For example, if GM and Ford are both running branded channels, we don't want their data to be merged. So we did an exclusive integration with YouTube where each subsection can be tracked differently, and so you have accurate results, accurate visit metrics. So for a branded channel on YouTube, you can get accurate referrals, time on the branded channel, and all those other session-based metrics, country, location, etc. as well.
So it should be more than page views. I should be able to get like visit metrics and referrals and even search keywords, if I remember correctly, they come through.
Right. Absolutely all the metrics are accurate on YouTube because of the special integration we did.
Good.
And again, that has to do with what we described with the cookies, for individual visitors being tied to a domain, that sometimes the cookies, cross and it makes it hard to track, and we've fixed it for you.
We've done it, yeah. I think this is one of the things that I'm actually particularly proud of, because it was very hard to solve this problem, but we've actually figured out how to solve it and make it really easy for you. So all you have to do is literally copy paste, I think, the account ID in YouTube admin area, and you save, and basically you can get all the data for performance of the brand channel with the rich reports, tons of reports in Google Analytics. So you should be able to see that. We'll link out to an article that tells you how to do that and look at your reports. And Nick, you're going to help me this afternoon set it up for my brand channel.
We'll set it up, yeah.
Cool. This is a good one from Shailendra again, and it's about e-commerce.
Okay.
I have an e-commerce website. I've set up both goals and e-commerce tracking for my website. But many times I've seen Google Analytics reports a few more goals than e-commerce transactions. Can you tell me what some of the reasons might be? So that's a good one.
You know, it's a real challenge to troubleshoot this on the fly. And I think the best, you know, in the camera without any documents, the best way to troubleshoot is actually to understand how analytics works. And when you put the tracking code on your site, we send an image request to the Google servers, which we capture and then process the data. So what you can do is use a tool like Firebug or Live Headers in Firefox to actually see every time that we're sending the data. And what you're able to do is then go to your site and do an audit to make sure that when people get to the site that you are indeed sending us the right data.
Yes.
The other thing to look at is in the metrics to see if you can isolate a group of people that exhibit this kind of issue, this behavior. For example, are there certain people coming maybe from Afghanistan that are exhibiting this more than other places? Are people from IE5 having this issue? Then you can go back and troubleshoot your implementation. We'll link to the troubleshooting document so you can learn how to do this yourself.
But it's fair to say, Nick, that when I am capturing goals, essentially goals are driven by page views. But when I'm tracking e-commerce, I'm actually getting a transaction. Is there a fair way to kind of differentiate them?
Conceptually, yes. The underlying way that it works is that they both send image requests. The goal sends one that has page view data. The transaction actually sends multiple ones. We send a request for the transaction itself, and then for each item in the cart, a request is being made. So for example, if you have a very long list of items that people are checking out and somebody leaves the thank you page very fast, potentially all those items might not get sent.
Got it. Excellent. Thank you, Nick. Here's one from Aaron in New York, also about e-commerce. What's the easiest way to set up analytics tracking for e-commerce, track the transactions, revenue, yada, 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 on the receipt page of an e-commerce site? Well, this is just implement, basically. I think that you have to go into the Google Analytics admin and say, I have an e-commerce site. You check that on first, and then you copy paste the code on your transaction page and just configure that. Is that it, Nick?
Well, there's a couple. That's exactly right. That's the first few steps. The last step is the hardest one, which is you have to actually take the values from the receipt page and send them to Google Analytics. So there's a couple of ways to do that. Also depends on the type of user you are. If you are actually using a third-party shopping engine, the easiest way is when on the final receipt page, use a little bit of JavaScript to extract those values and put them into our tracking code. If you don't have access to the final e-commerce engine, for example, it's a third-party shopping cart. When you finally push the button to transact, you should be able to know what's all in the cart, and you should be able to send the data.
I see.
And then finally, if you're actually an e-commerce provider, please simplify this for your end clients and just do a legitimate integration with analytics, so that way people don't have to ask these questions for us.
Exactly. So essentially, one of the last steps you're saying is, for example, I could say I want to send the product ID into Google Analytics, but product ID is called monkey's head. So I'll say monkey_head is the field where I'm capturing product ID, and you have to just hook that up, and they will capture all the data correctly. Okay, I think that's the step that you mentioned is sort of the hardest, or you have to be careful about it.
Right.
Okay, great, thank you.
So you've asked me a lot of questions.
My turn now.
Now it's time to ask you a little bit of questions. So is it possible to set a default starting date range for the Google Analytics? In my case, I've started collecting data in 2008. Every time I enter GA, I have to set that date because GA sets a date range for a period of a month. This is from Alexander in Poland.
Hi, hello Alexander. That's true. I mean, in Google Analytics, in every single report on the top nav, you can see pick the date range you can choose. And in Google Analytics, you have 4 different time periods you can track: hourly and daily, weekly, and monthly. Those are the default buckets that are provided to you. And depending on what you're looking at in terms of the report and these 4 time periods, Google Analytics will automatically bucket into these buckets. And so if I log in today, my default view is report by day for the month. But if you stretch it all the way back to, let's say, 2007, Google Analytics will just go and bring that data back. It'll just show you 0 all the way through 2008, whenever you started to do the reporting. So there isn't a way in which you can tell Google Analytics, never let me choose any date before 2008 because I did not have GA. There's just no way to do that. But in any given report, it's easy in the drop-down for you to choose how far back you want to stretch the time, so it won't show you that other data. But unfortunately, there's just no way to just tell GA, don't show me data before X date by default. So that's a good question.
Yeah, and the other thing we should also mention is once you're logged into Google Analytics, you can bookmark.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
You can actually click a link and go directly into the report. If you notice, the URL actually defines the date range. So actually, you can create your own list of bookmarks that has custom date ranges. So that way you can just click and save yourself some time.
Exactly. Actually, that's a good point. When my bookmark in my toolbar in Chrome is set to a particular report, so I don't go to the dashboard either. I just click the bookmark in the toolbar. It just takes me directly into the report I want every day.
Yeah, it saves a lot of time with it.
Great, great.
So let's look at the next question here. This one's from Lucas O. in Munich, Germany. For each article on my website, I need to report which referrer produced how many page views. For external referrers like newsletters, I use the campaign report. What do I do with page view referred by teasers on my own website? These are not external referrers. So what this guy has is a couple different call-outs, cross-promotions on his site,
of course.
And he wants to know what's the value of having those.
And it's very much like, for example, when I go to the New York Times website, on the right nav, they might be promoting me to go to, let's say, the op-ed or sports section, and he wants to track how many people go to the sports section from those referrers he has.
Right.
Essentially internal campaigns, if you will.
Right.
And really the best possible option here is to use event tracking. And it's just a beautiful, scalable way in which you can capture that piece of data. And the wonderful thing is you can actually segment event tracking values, which is perfect because you just go in and create a segment for the events that you're interested in and apply them to the referral report, apply them to the goals report, apply them to literally any report in Google Analytics. And you can see if that particular internal, what does he call it? Internal campaigns that you're running are actually productive for your business. And so that's the simplest way to do it. And Nick is going to link out in our blog post to how to use event tracking. But it's really the most scalable, best way that you can do that and track essentially what you're calling internal referrers. So that's a good question, Lucas.
And you can also track not only the people who actually interacted and clicked that link, but people who didn't. So you have something to compare it against as well.
Yes, and of course, one of the other things is, event tracking was essentially built to track rich media and your videos and your audio things and all kinds of flash things that you have on your website that you can't track easily with page-based tracking. So that's why event tracking was built, but it can be used beautifully for something like this as well.
Great. So the next question comes from Raijada from Brisbane, Australia. I have advanced segment that groups social media traffic. Media matches exactly to social, which is how we tag social media campaign activity. Or source contains Twitter, or source contains Facebook. So that's the expression that she used to create the advanced segment. Why does Google Organic show up in all traffic?
Right. So it seems to be a riddle wrapped in a mystery here a little bit. So let me unpack it. Let's do the first one first. If you're using medium equal quote unquote social, that's where you have any question. Actually, it's unlikely that you're tracking social media websites because they don't call themselves social. Right. That's not what they call themselves. But for example, I am actually, when I tweet all the links out in my Twitter account, especially if I link them back to my blog, I will actually create a campaign tracking parameter. And I will have, in Medium, I might add social, just to show that it's coming from my own social media efforts. In that case, for those links that I have tagged with those campaign parameters, Google Analytics will track it fine. Otherwise, perhaps the simplest way is to use a regular expression with all the sources, essentially from the URLs, not even the names of the website, URLs, in order to capture and create a bucket for social media. There are many different ways to do this, but essentially one simplest way is to say, hey, sources are these, and that buckets it into one nice bucket, social media, and you look at that segment in your report. So that's the second way to do it correctly. The first one is using campaign parameters for links you are creating. And the third part of your question is, why does Google Organic show up in all traffic? It's because Google, the search engine, is a part of all traffic. And my hypothesis is that you're actually looking at the report that shows source/medium. So if you can actually do that, it's a default report in Google Analytics. In that case, you're seeing Google/organic. If you were doing paid search and doing really well, right underneath it, you'll see Google/paid search, or PPC actually. So that's why you're seeing Google/organic, but essentially if you change the report to just show you sources in all traffic, you'll actually just see Google as well as the other search engine. So that's a good way to think about that.
Great. So here's the next question from Shalindra. from Dubai, from Indore, India.
Yes.
We have a couple big fans in Indore, India. Can I track results of polling buttons or feedback forms in Google Analytics?
Yes, you definitely can do that, and our GACs have developed some really great ways in which you can do that. Again, our authorized consultants. And our good friend Justin Curoni has actually written a blog post about how do you do form tracking in Google Analytics, and we're going to link out to Justin's post. Justin also has a great book, by the way, if you want to buy. It's only $10. It's a wonderful book. We'll link out to his book as well. So go ahead and buy that book. Justin's book is just fabulous for all of these
Christmas
kinds of
presents, maybe. Yeah.
Exactly,
All
exactly.
right.
But one real quick thing, I think Justin also points this out in his blog post, that you cannot track PII information from forms with Google Analytics. Tracking PII is prohibited in Google Analytics, so you won't be able to track, if I was filling out your form, my name, my email address, my physical address, and those kinds. They're all PII information, so you cannot track that according to the terms and conditions that you accept when you sign up for Google Analytics. So just be aware of that. Other than that, you can track other kinds of information from the forms that you're using. So that's a good question, but be aware of that. Here's one last question about integrations with CMS systems like Kentico, Joomla, and others. It's difficult with analytics and other kinds of things. Actually, there are many plugins and extensions written out for Joomla and WordPress and other things. Just do a quick Google search, they'll help you find it. But enterprising developers have figured out how to easily create extension. They have created extensions and plugins you can use to easily implement Google Analytics. So I would just go out and look for that. So
definitely.
With that, I think we've reached the end of our questions. Thanks so much. Keep them coming. We'll link out to our Dory page, the moderator page, and you can go ahead and submit questions for our next video. We're very happy to take your questions about an expansive category of analysis and other kinds of challenges as you face in being data-driven. But with that, goodbye from me, Avinash.
And Nick, take care.
Take care.